In this short video, I was thinking that we could have a look at how input and output work in Python. And we will just cover the very basics and not go into too much details. But the first things that we need to do is to create a new script. Don't forget to save your script and give it a name that ends with .py. And if we want to display any information to the user, we can use the print instruction. And if it's just a message that we want to display, we could just type it in here. So for example, if we want to say hello to the user, this is what will be printed to the screen. So we will print the string hello to the screen. So let's try to run it and see if it works. And we see, yes, it does. So if we have a string that we want to print, we can do it with the print instruction. But now imagine that we want to say hello to the user using the user's name instead. But we don't know the user's name, so we first have to ask the user what his or her name is. And we can do that in the following way. What we're doing here is that we're using the input instruction. And whenever we call the input instruction, we have to supply a string that will be displayed on the screen with a question so that the user knows what to input. And in this case, what we're doing is asking for the user's name. It is then stored in the computer's memory, and our variable that we call name, we can later use to access whatever name the user inputted. And if we want to write a nicer greeting message here, we can use an F string. And if we put an F before our string, we can also add placeholders in the string. And I want my placeholder to be here, after hello, but before the exclamation mark. And here I want to add the name that we just read from the user. So I want it to say, for example, hello Kalle or hello Anna. So let's try and see how it would look. What is our name? Our name is Kalle. Now we see that we replaced this placeholder with whatever we inputted here. So if we say our name is Kalle, that will be stored in the name variable, which is then fetched in here when we're printing it. So if we try it with another name, so maybe our name now is Anna, we see that, all right, it will always use whatever we entered here when it replaces this placeholder here. One neat thing with using F strings is that we can supply a formatting. So we can say that, all right, I want this name that we're going to print to take up at least 20 characters. So I want the length of it to be at least 20 characters, even if the name is not itself 20 characters. So let's have a look and say that our name is Max. We see that this part here, up until the exclamation mark, it is 20 characters. So even if our name, Max, is only 3 characters, then Python will automatically add 17 spaces here to say that, all right, it should be at least 20 characters here. If our name was longer than 20 characters, it will print the full name, even if it's longer than 20. We can also decide if it should be left or right aligned. We saw that now it was left aligned. Strings are always left aligned by default. But we can say that we want it to be right aligned. then it would look something like this when we print it. So if our name is Kalle, we see that it still takes up these 20 characters here, but we right align the text, the name. And we can also center align it, and it would look like this. So if our name is Anna, we see that, all right, we have specified that the length should be a minimum of 20 characters, but now we print Anna in the middle. And even if strings are left aligned by default, if we want to be very explicit about it, we can use the less than sign, and we'll see that it looks like it did before, that it is left aligned. But it could be good to know that we have left align, right align, and center align. Now let's look at a different example. Now we read strings from the user. We asked the user for information that is text, but what if we have numbers? That works similar, but a little bit different. So let's have a look at an example of how we can read integers from the user. I'll write a little bit of code first, and then we can talk about it. So we can see the code that I wrote here. We are to read the length and the width from the user, storing them in two variables. Then we're going to calculate the area, taking length times width. And finally, we're gonna display the area to the user. But here is one thing to remember. When we read something using input, it will always read it as a string. And in this case, we want it as integers so that we can make this calculation. What we need to do then is to add int around the input statement so that Python knows that this should be saved as an integer. Now we can run it, and we can specify some length here. And we can see that, right, we could calculate it and we could print it. We can also format numbers. So for example, I could say that I want this to have a minimum width of 20. And if we run it and we supply the same numbers, we can see that numbers are right aligned. Remember, strings were left aligned by default, and numbers are right aligned by default. So if we want the number to be left aligned, we have to explicitly say that we want that. You can see that now it is left aligned. And one last thing that I want to show is that if we want to read real numbers instead, we have to use float instead of integer, so that Python knows that it's a real number that we want to read. And then we'll just for a second remove the formatting. And then we run it. And we specify that, all right, I want it to be 12.3 in length and 13.3 in width. Here we can see that, yeah, it calculates it, but the formatting is not so nice. So maybe we can do something here with specifying that we only want 2 decimals. And we do that in a similar way that we have the colon specifying that, all right, I'm gonna format this before it's printed. And if we do .2f, we say that, all right, I want 2 decimals, and it is a floating point number that we want to format here. So now if we supply the numbers again, we can see that the output is much nicer. We only have 2 decimals here. And we can add a minimum width. For example, let's do 3 as the minimum width. And then if we run it again, here is worth to stop and think, because we see that what we printed here, the width of this is larger than 3. We said that the minimum width should be 3 and we should have 2 decimals. So the 2 decimals are here, but the minimum width, we have printed something that is longer than 3. And in this case, the number that we have more digits, so it doesn't fit in 3. So it's larger than the minimum width that we supplied. That means that it will print a bigger number, or we will print more characters here. However, if we change it and make it bigger, the width, we can see it is the minimum width, because now it is taking up more space than the number is long.